The living room buzzed with unspoken grudges, a restless hum that seemed to pulse through the walls of Nana's old house. The air hung heavy, laced with the faint must of mildew clinging to the faded curtains and the sharp tang of furniture polish Diane had applied that morning in a futile attempt to mask the neglect. Eleanor Grayson, 32, perched on the edge of her late grandmother's floral couch, its fabric worn thin under decades of use, the faded roses prickling against her jeans. She traced one of the petals with her fingertip, a nervous habit, as her family loomed around her, her mother, Diane, her Uncle Ray, and her two older cousins, Jess and Tyler. They gathered under the pretense of settling Nana's estate, but the air crackled with something uglier, something that had festered long before the lawyer's call summoned them here. A mahogany box sat open on the coffee table, its polished surface catching the dim light from the single bulb flickering overhead. The contents spilled out like a confession, yellowed letters tied with twine, a stack of Polaroids curling at the edges, and a worn leather ledger that looked older than the house itself. Eleanor's fingers hovered over it, hesitant, as if touching it might ignite the tension already smoldering in the room. She'd found the box in Nana's attic 2 days ago, handed over by the lawyer with a curt nod and a muttered, "You're the executor. Figure it out." She hadn't expected this, a family meeting turning into a battlefield. Diane stood near the fireplace, her posture rigid, clutching one of the letters so tightly the paper crinkled in her grip. Her ash-blonde hair, streaked with gray, was pulled into a severe bun, and her lips pressed into a thin line as she stared at Eleanor. "You had no right to dig through her things, Ellie," she said, her voice sharp enough to cut through the stale air. "This is private. You're stirring up trouble over nothing, just like always." The always landed like a barb, a reminder of every time Eleanor had been dismissed, too quiet, too soft, too buried in her numbers to matter. Uncle Ray sprawled in the armchair across from her, a burly man whose perpetual scowl seemed etched into his weathered face. His flannel shirt strained against his broad shoulders as he leaned forward, elbows on his knees, his meaty hands flexing as if itching for a fight. "She's right," he growled, his voice a low rumble that matched the distant thunder rolling outside. "You're still that mousy kid who hid behind your calculators, Ellie. Not a detective. Quit meddling in stuff that don't concern you." His words carried the weight of years, memories of a teenage Eleanor hunched over her homework while Ray and Diane argued over bills in the next room, their voices drowning out her existence. Jess and Tyler, her cousins, lounged across the mismatched armchairs on either side of the coffee table, their smirks sharp as knives. Jess, 35, with her dyed platinum hair and chipped red nail polish, kicked her boots up onto the ottoman, crossing her arms. "What's next, Ellie?" she drawled, her tone dripping with mockery. "Gonna audit us to death? Maybe tally up how many times we forgot your birthday." Tyler, a year older and broader, snickered, his buzzed head tilting as he exchanged a knowing glance with his sister. "Yeah, stick to your spreadsheets, cuz. Leave the grown-up stuff to us." Eleanor felt the heat rising in her chest, a slow burn that crept up her throat, but she kept her face still, her hazel eyes fixed on the ledger. She'd always been the quiet one, the accountant who preferred the clean logic of numbers to the messy chaos of family drama. They saw her as a shadow, reliable when tax season rolled around, invisible otherwise. The girl who'd spent Thanksgivings balancing Nana's checkbook while they bickered over the last slice of pie. The woman who'd stayed late at her desk job, crunching figures, while they bragged about their big plans that never seemed to pan out. They assumed she'd back down under their glares, fold like she always had. They didn't know her at all. The room itself seemed to side with them. The walls, papered in appealing floral print Nana had loved, pressed in close, the faint ticking of the mantel clock marking time like a judge's gavel. A draft slipped through the cracked window pane, rustling the curtains and carrying the earthy scent of rain-soaked soil from the yard outside. Eleanor's fingers tightened on the couch cushion, grounding herself. She'd spent her childhood in this house, summers sprawled on the rug with Nana's old radio crackling, winters helping her tally grocery receipts by the wood stove. It was a sanctuary then, a refuge from Diane's sharp tongue and Ray's bluster. Now it felt like a cage, trapping her with a family she'd never fully understood. Diane paced a step closer, her heels clicking on the hardwood floor, the letter trembling slightly in her hand. "I mean it, Ellie," she said, her voice rising. "You should have left this to me and Ray. We knew her best. You're just poking at things you don't get." There was a flicker of something in her eyes. Panic, maybe, or guilt. But it vanished behind her usual mask of control. Diane had always been the one to take charge, to smooth over Nana's eccentricities, with a tight smile and a quick excuse. Ray nodded along, his scowl deepening, a silent agreement forged in years of shared secrets Eleanor had never been privy to. "You think Nana wanted me to just hand it over?" Eleanor asked, her voice soft but steady, cutting through the noise. She lifted her gaze from the ledger, meeting Diane's stare. "The lawyer didn't think so. He gave it to me. Said I'm the executor." It wasn't a challenge. Not yet. But it hung there, a quiet defiance they didn't expect. Jess snorted, rolling her eyes. "Executor? What? You think that makes you Sherlock Holmes now?" "It's just a title, Ellie. Doesn't mean you get to play detective with Nana's junk." Tyler chuckled, leaning back with his hands behind his head, as if the whole thing were a show put on for his amusement. "Yeah, relax. It's probably just her old knitting patterns or some grocery lists. You're acting like it's a treasure map." "Maybe it is," Eleanor said, her fingers brushing the ledger's cracked spine. The words slipped out before she could stop them, and the room stilled for a heartbeat. Diane's eyes narrowed, Ray's jaw tightened, and the cousin's smirks faltered, just for a moment. They didn't believe her, not yet, but the shift was there, a crack in their certainty. Outside, the thunder grew louder, a low growl that rattled the windows. The flickering bulb cast jagged shadows across the coffee table, dancing over the box and its secrets. Eleanor's pulse quickened, not from fear but from something else. Anticipation, maybe, or the weight of what she'd already glimpsed in those pages. She'd spent years balancing books, finding order in chaos, but this was different. This wasn't just numbers. This was her family, or what she'd thought her family was. They assumed she'd back down, shrink into the silence they'd always pushed her toward. They were wrong. Eleanor straightened on the floral couch, the faint creak of its springs slicing through the brittle silence that followed her cousin's taunts. Her hazel eyes swept the room, catching Jess's smirk, Tyler's lazy sprawl, Uncle Ray's clenched fists, and her mother Diane's rigid stance by the fireplace. The heat rising in her chest wasn't anger. Not yet, but a steady, thrumming resolve, like the pulse of a machine gearing up after years of idling. She'd spent her life absorbing their jabs, retreating into the crisp order of numbers when their voices grew too loud, too sharp. She'd let them paint her as the quiet one, the shadow who faded into spreadsheets while they filled the room with noise. "Not tonight. I didn't dig," she said, her voice low and steady, cutting through the tension like a wire pulled taut. "The lawyer handed me the box with Nana's will 3 days ago, after the funeral. He stood there in his cheap suit, smelling of stale coffee, and said it was my job to sort it, because I'm the executor." She paused, letting the word hang in the air. Executor, watching it ripple across their faces like a stone dropped into still water. Diane's lips parted, a flicker of surprise cracking her polished mask. Ray's scowl twitched, his thick fingers curling tighter, knuckles whitening against his jeans. Jess and Tyler exchanged a glance, their smirks faltering as if they felt the ground shift beneath them, but couldn't yet name why. Eleanor reached for the mahogany box, her fingers brushing its cool, polished edge before settling on the ledger nestled among the scattered letters and photos. She lifted it gently, almost reverently, its weight a familiar anchor from the long nights she'd spent hunched over it in Nana's attic, the only sound the creak of the house settling around her. The leather cover was cracked and peeling at the corners, the spine faded from years of handling, and the pages inside carried the faint, earthy scent of ink and dust. Yellowed sheets filled with Nana's precise, looping handwriting. She tapped it once, a soft thud against the coffee table, and met their eyes again, her gaze steady as stone. "And I found this." Diane waved a dismissive hand, her manicured nails flashing in the dim light from the flickering bulb overhead. "Oh, for heaven's sake, Ellie," she said, her voice sliding into that syrupy condescension she'd perfected over decades. "It's just her old recipes or something. Maybe a list of her knitting club dues. You're making a mountain out of a molehill, as usual." The "as usual" was a barb, a quiet weapon honed from years of brushing Eleanor aside. Too meticulous, too serious, too small in their sprawling, chaotic world. Diane tilted her head, a faint smile tugging at her lips, as if she could charm this moment back into her control. Eleanor didn't flinch. She opened the ledger to a page she'd marked with a bent corner, her thumb brushing a date scrawled in red ink. March 12, 1998. "Then why does it list every loan you and Uncle Ray took from her?" Her words landed like a gavel in a courtroom, sharp and unyielding, shattering the hum of the room into a jagged silence. Diane's hand froze mid-wave, her face draining of color until it matched the gray streaks threading through her ash-blonde hair. Ray's head snapped up, his scowl deepening into something raw and feral, his breath catching in a low, guttural grunt. Jess's boots slipped off the ottoman with a heavy thud, and Tyler's arms dropped from behind his head, his snicker choking off into a stunned cough. "Dates," Eleanor said, her voice steady as she turned the page, revealing rows of Nana's meticulous figures, columns of numbers and notes etched in fading ink. Amounts. Interest rates. None of it repaid. She slid the ledger forward an inch on the table, its leather edge scraping softly against the wood, an invitation they didn't dare accept. March 1998, $10,000 to you, Mom, for that boutique you swore would change everything. Closed in 6 months, shelves still half-stocked when the bank took it. July 2003, $15,000 to Uncle Ray for a down payment on that Dodge truck he flipped 2 weeks later for a quick buck. And it goes on, year after year, page after page, down to the penny. She paused, her gaze locking with Diane's, unflinching. Does that sound like recipes? The silence stretched, taut and electric, broken only by the faint patter of rain swelling against the window and the mantel clock's relentless ticking. Diane's mouth opened, then closed, her eyes darting to Ray as if he might throw her a lifeline. He didn't. He shifted in his chair, the leather groaning under his bulk, his broad shoulders hunching as if the weight of her words pressed him down. Jess whispered, "No way," under her breath, her chipped red nails digging into the armrest, while Tyler leaned forward, his buzzed head cocked. "Wait, what?" he muttered, his voice cracking with disbelief. "She wrote all that down?" Eleanor let the question hang, her fingers tracing the ledger's spine as she watched them unravel. She'd known they'd doubt her. Years of their dismissal had taught her that. But this was different. This wasn't a guess or a hunch. This was evidence, cold and undeniable, laid bare in Nana's own hand. And it wasn't just the loans. There was something else in those pages, something that had kept her up past midnight, squinting under the attic's bare bulb, piecing together a puzzle she hadn't known existed. "There's more," she said, her voice cutting through Ray's shifting and Diane's silence like a blade through fog. She flipped to another page, this one dog-eared and marked with a faint pencil line, and traced a name written in Nana's careful script. A name I didn't recognize, Margaret Ellis. Nana left her half the house. She looked up, letting the weight of it settle over them like dust after a collapse. "Who is she?" Diane's face went white, her hand trembling so violently the letter she'd been clutching slipped to the floor, fluttering down like a wounded bird. She didn't bend to pick it up, couldn't, it seemed. Her eyes locked on Eleanor as if seeing her for the first time. Ray's scowl vanished, replaced by a blank, hollow stare, his fists unclenching until his hands lay limp on his thighs. Jess's whisper turned into a sharp, "What the hell?" and Tyler jolted upright, his bravado crumbling. "Half the house," he echoed, louder now, his voice rising. "Who's this Margaret chick?" Nana didn't have, did she? Eleanor didn't answer, not yet. She watched them, her pulse steady despite the storm brewing in their eyes, the way their certainty cracked like old plaster. Diane recovered first, her voice trembling but edged with steel. "That's ridiculous," she stammered, bending stiffly to snatch the letter from the floor, her fingers fumbling. "She would have told us. Nana didn't keep secrets like that. Not from me, not from Ray. You're reading it wrong, Ellie. You've got no idea what you're doing." "Am I?" Eleanor tilted her head, her tone calm but unyielding, a quiet force that belied the years she'd spent shrinking under their shadows. "It's in the will, Mom. Signed, notarized, dated 6 months ago, before her last hospital stay. Margaret Ellis gets half. And this ledger." She tapped a passage scribbled in the margin, too small for them to read from across the table, but heavy with implication. "It's not just loans. It's a story. Nana wrote more than numbers here. She wrote why." Ray lunged forward, his hand outstretched as if to grab the ledger, his breath ragged and uneven. "You're making this up," he snarled, though his voice wavered, thin and brittle. "You're no expert. You're just a damn bookkeeper playing at something you don't understand." His arm hovered, trembling, then fell back as if the fight had drained out of him mid-reach. Eleanor met his glare, unflinching, the ledger resting in her lap like a shield forged from years of quiet study. She thought of the nights she'd spent after Grandpa's death, helping Nana untangle her finances, hours poring over bank statements by the wood stove, learning tax codes from library books, mastering estate rules on her own. It had started as a lifeline for Nana, a way to keep her afloat, but it became Eleanor's refuge, a world of logic and truth where she wasn't just the mousy kid they mocked. She'd never told them how deep she'd gone, how the rules of law and numbers had become her armor. Until now. I don't need to be a lawyer, she said, her words slow and deliberate, each one a brick in a wall they couldn't climb. Nana trusted me to figure this out. And I have. She closed the ledger with a soft snap, the sound echoing like a door slamming shut on their assumptions on the life they'd thought they knew. The room held its breath, the rain outside swelling into a steady roar, as Eleanor sat there quiet, steady, and suddenly the most powerful person in the house. They'd underestimated her for years, written her off as a shadow in their loud, messy lives. That was their mistake. Eleanor sat back on the floral couch, the ledger still warm in her lap from her grip, its leather edges pressing into her thighs like a silent ally. The room pulsed with the aftermath of her last words. Margaret Ellis, half the house, and she could feel the shift, the way the air thickened as her family grappled with the unraveling of their certainty. Diane's trembling hand hovered over the fallen letter. Ray's bulk loomed forward in his chair, and Jess and Tyler stared, their mockery replaced by something raw and unmoored. Eleanor's pulse thrummed steady, a quiet drumbeat beneath her calm exterior. She'd spent years preparing for moments like this, not this exact fight, but the clarity of truth over chaos. Now it was time to finish what she'd started. I don't need to be a lawyer, she said, her voice cutting through the silence with the precision of a scalpel. She reached into the canvas tote at her feet, her fingers brushing past a calculator and a dog-eared tax manual before closing around a thin stack of papers. She pulled out a photocopy of Nana's will, its edges crisp from the library copier she'd used 2 nights ago, and held it up, the black ink stark against the white. Nana named me executor for a reason. She knew I'd dig where you wouldn't. And I've already cross-checked the ledger with her bank records. Every withdrawal, every deposit, every lie you told yourselves. Diane's head snapped up, her eyes narrowing as she clutched the crumpled letter tighter, her knuckles whitening. You're bluffing, she said, her voice sharp but fraying at the edges. You've got no proof, just your word and that stupid book. Eleanor didn't blink. She set the will on the coffee table beside the ledger and opened it to a page she'd flagged with a yellow sticky note. June 2010, she said, her tone flat, factual, like she was reading a balance sheet. You borrowed $50,000, Mom. Called it a business idea, that consignment shop you swore would put us on the map. You rented the storefront on Elm Street, bought inventory you couldn't sell, and let it collapse in under a year. Nana covered the lease when you couldn't, didn't she? Took it out of her savings while you promised to pay her back. She tapped the ledger, pointing to a line in Nana's tight script. Diane, $50, 000, 6% interest, no payments received. Diane's face flushed, a mottled red creeping up her neck. That's not how it happened, she snapped, her voice rising. She wanted to help me. She offered. You're twisting it, Ellie. You weren't even there for most of it. Wasn't I? Eleanor's gaze didn't waver. I was there when she cried over the phone bill she couldn't pay because you drained her account. I was there when she asked me to figure out where her money went. She turned to Ray, who'd gone still, his scowl replaced by a tight-lipped grimace. And you, Uncle Ray, October 2015. $75,000 for that truck dealership. You told her it was a sure thing, a family investment. You bought 3 Fords, sold them at a loss, and pocketed the rest. Never paid her a dime. It's all here, dates, amounts, even the VIN numbers she tracked. Ray's chair creaked as he shifted, his broad frame tensing like a coiled spring. You don't know shit, he growled, his voice low and rough, but there was a tremor in it, a crack in his usual bluster. That was between me and her. You're making it sound like I stole from her. Didn't you? Eleanor flipped to another page, her fingers steady despite the heat of his glare. She wrote it down, Ray. Every cent you took, every excuse you gave. And then there's this. She paused, letting the moment stretch, her eyes sweeping the room. Jess's wide stare, Tyler's slack jaw, Diane's trembling lips. Margaret Ellis. I didn't know the name either, so I searched public records. Birth certificate, adoption papers, dated 1962. She's Nana's daughter. Given up at birth. My aunt. Your sister. The room erupted into chaos. Jess jolted upright, her boots slamming the floor. What the hell are you talking about? She barked, her voice shrill. Tyler's hands flew to his head, raking over his buzzed scalp. A sister? Nana had another kid? No way. No freaking way. Diane's letter crumpled fully in her fist, her breath hitching as she stammered. That's ridiculous. She would have told us. She would have told me. You're lying, Ellie, or you've lost it. Would she? Eleanor opened the ledger to a page near the back, marked with a faint crease and a passage in Nana's slanted cursive. She read aloud, her voice steady but laced with something heavier: grief. Maybe, or awe. Diane and Ray took more than money. They took my trust. I kept Margaret a secret to protect her from this family's greed. She deserves what's left, not them. She looked up, letting Nana's words hang like smoke in the air. She tracked every cent you owed her, every promise you broke. You dismissed her as a senile old woman, shuffling around with her tea and her knitting. But she saw you, saw all of you, and she wrote it down. Ray lunged forward, his hand shooting out to grab the ledger, his face twisted with fury. Give me that damn thing, he roared, his voice booming over the rain pounding the windows. Eleanor snatched it back, her reflexes quick, the book pressed to her chest as she stood, her slight frame suddenly towering in the dim light. I've got copies, she said coolly, her tone ice over steel. Scanned, saved, sent to my email. You can't erase this, Ray. It's done. He froze, his arm hovering midair, his chest heaving as the fight drained out of him. He sank back into the chair, his hands falling limp, his eyes darting to Diane as if she might salvage this. She didn't. Her face crumpled, tears welling but not falling, her voice a broken whisper. You're wrong, Ellie. She didn't mean it like that. She loved us. Did she? Eleanor set the ledger down, deliberate and slow, and pulled her phone from her pocket. I've already contacted Margaret. Found her through a registry, lives 2 hours away. She's coming tomorrow. The house is hers by law, half of it, anyway. The other half goes to me, per the will. She tapped the photocopy, her finger resting on Nana's signature. You get nothing until you settle your debts. That's what Nana wanted. Jess's voice cut through, high and frantic. You can't just half the house? To some stranger? What about us? Tyler nodded, his bravado gone, his hands gripping the armrests. Yeah, what the hell, Ellie? You're screwing us over for someone we don't even know. Eleanor turned to them, her expression unreadable. I'm not screwing anyone. Nana did this. She chose me to make it right. And Margaret's not a stranger, she's family, whether you like it or not. She glanced at Diane, then Ray, their silence louder than their earlier protests. You thought you knew her, thought she was just a sweet old lady who'd let you take and take. You were wrong. The room felt smaller now, the walls closing in with the weight of her words. The rain outside roared, a steady drumbeat against the windows, but inside, the storm was hers. Diane stared at the floor, the letter a mangled ball in her fist. Ray's head bowed, his hands clasped as if in defeat. Jess and Tyler slumped, their defiance snuffed out like a candle in the wind. Eleanor stood there, the ledger and Will at her side, a quiet force they'd never seen coming. She dismantled their lies, piece by piece, with nothing but facts and Nana's truth. And she wasn't done. Eleanor stood, the floral couch creaking faintly beneath her as she rose, the ledger and Will still resting on the coffee table like relics of a battle just won. The living room air hung thick, heavy with the damp scent of rain seeping through the cracked window and the acrid edge of Diane's perfume, a floral note gone sour in the tension. Her mother's voice shattered the silence, sharp and brittle, a final flare of resistance. You can't do this, Ellie. Diane snapped, her tone cracking like glass under pressure. You're ruining us, tearing this family apart over some old papers and a stranger's name. Her hands trembled violently, the crumpled letter slipping from her grasp to the hardwood floor, its edges curling inward as if retreating from the fight. Eleanor turned to face her, her slight frame steady against the gust of Diane's words, her tote bag slung over her shoulder like a soldier's pack. No, she said, her voice calm but unyielding, a quiet thunder that rolled over the rain drumming outside. You ruined yourselves years ago, when you decided Nana's trust was yours to plunder. I just found the proof. She gestured to the ledger, its cracked leather glinting faintly in the flickering light of the single bulb overhead, a silent witness to the wreckage they'd left behind. The room seemed to contract, the peeling floral walls pressing in with the weight of her words, the air buzzing with a silence that felt alive, electric. Jess slumped deeper into her armchair, her platinum hair falling across her face like a curtain, her chipped red nails digging into the faded upholstery as she stared at the floor, her breath shallow. Tyler sat rigid, his hands clamped on his knees, his usual swagger buried beneath a stunned stillness, his eyes flicking to the ledger as if it might leap up and bite him. Uncle Ray sank back into his seat, his broad shoulders hunching until he seemed smaller, his scowl replaced by a hollow stare that drifted to the coffee table, then away, lost in the shadows. Diane's eyes glistened with tears, her lips quivering. But Eleanor couldn't parse the emotion, guilt, anger, or the raw sting of exposure. Maybe it was all of them, tangled together in a knot she'd never untie. Diane's voice rose again, softer now, threaded with a desperate edge. "You don't understand, Ellie," she said, her hands fluttering uselessly at her sides, fingers twitching as if reaching for something to hold on to. "We needed that money, times were hard, and she wanted to help. You're making it sound like we're criminals, like we meant to hurt her." Her gaze darted to Ray, pleading for backup, but he only grunted, his head dipping lower, his thick fingers rubbing at his temples as if he could scrub away the last hour. "Help doesn't mean taking without giving back," Eleanor replied, her tone even, though a flicker of something sorrow, maybe, or weariness crossed her face. "She gave you everything, her savings, her patience, her silence, and you left her counting coins to pay her electric bill. I saw it, Mom. I saw her sit at that kitchen table, worrying over late notices while you planned your next big scheme." She turned to Ray, her eyes locking onto his. "And you, Uncle Ray, she sold Grandpa's old watch to cover your investment. The one with the scratched face he wore every day. She cried for days after that, hid it from me because she didn't want me to worry. Did you know?" Ray's head jerked up, his mouth opening as if to argue, but the words died in his throat. His hands fell limp into his lap, heavy and useless, and he looked away, the rain-streaked window reflecting the defeat etched into his weathered face. Jess muttered, "That's messed up," her voice barely a whisper, her eyes darting to Ray as if seeing him anew. Tyler shifted uncomfortably, his foot tapping a nervous rhythm against the floor, his voice low and unsteady. "We didn't know, okay? She never said anything, she just kept smiling, bringing us cookies." "She shouldn't have had to," Eleanor cut in, her words firm but not cruel, a line drawn in the sand. She wrote it down instead, every dollar, every disappointment, every time you took more than she could give. And she trusted me to make it right. She adjusted the strap of her bag, the photocopy of the will still lying on the table like a gauntlet they couldn't pick up. "Margaret gets her share tomorrow. You can figure out the rest when you face what you owe Nana and each other." Diane stepped forward, her heels clicking sharply on the hardwood, her voice breaking into a ragged plea. "Ellie, please, don't do this. We're your family. We can work this out together, sit down and talk it through. You don't have to bring some stranger into this." Her tears spilled over now, streaking her cheeks in uneven lines, her hands reaching out but stopping short, hovering in the air. Eleanor didn't move. She'd heard that tone before, promises wrapped in desperation, always followed by more excuses, more delays. This time, she wouldn't bend. "It's already done," she said, her voice final as she turned toward the hall. "Good night." Her footsteps echoed on the hardwood, steady and deliberate, as she left them there, a tableau of shattered illusions fading behind her. Diane's sobs grew softer, Ray's silence heavier, Jess and Tyler's stunned murmurs blending into the rain as she climbed the narrow stairs to Nana's kitchen. Later that night, alone in the small, familiar space, Eleanor stood by the counter, the kettle's low whistle piercing the stillness like a memory calling her back. The kitchen smelled of chamomile and the faint lemon tang of Nana's old dish soap, a scent woven into the cracked linoleum and the chipped white cabinets. She poured herself a cup of tea, the steam rising in delicate curls that fogged the window above the sink, and set it beside the ledger, which she'd carried upstairs like a piece of Nana herself. The rain had softened to a gentle patter, tapping against the glass, the world outside cloaked in a gray haze that mirrored the swirl of her thoughts. She sank into a chair at the round oak table, its surface scarred from years of use, coffee rings, pencil marks, the faint outline of a heart she'd carved as a kid. This was where she'd sat as a girl, legs swinging, watching Nana tally receipts with a pencil stub, her glasses slipping down her nose as she muttered about rising prices. The ledger sat open before her now, its pages a map of decades, loans inked in black, disappointments in red, and Margaret's name, a quiet bombshell in blue. Eleanor traced a line of Nana's writing, her fingers lingering on the ink, faded but resolute, and pictured her here, late at night, pen in hand, guarding her secrets in silence. She thought of Margaret's voice on the phone that morning, soft, hesitant, but warm when Eleanor explained who she was, a thread of connection stretching across years. Then she thought of Diane and Ray, the mother and uncle she'd thought she knew, their faces tonight a gallery of greed and denial she'd never fully grasped. Nana had seen it all, their flaws, their grasping hands, their refusal to look back at the wreckage they left in their wake. She'd borne it quietly, her trust chipped away year by year, until she'd turned to Eleanor, the one they'd dismissed, the one who'd sat here with her, balancing books when the world got too loud. The tea warmed her hands as she sipped, the steam curling upward like a question she couldn't quite pin down. What did it mean to know your family? Not just their faces, Diane's tight smile hiding her schemes, Ray's booming laugh masking his debts, or their habits just as sharp tongue, Tyler's careless grin. But the truths they buried beneath it all? She'd spent her life balancing books, finding solace in the certainty of numbers, the way they added up or didn't, no matter what anyone claimed. But this was about balancing justice, about weighing what was owed against what was taken, what was hidden against what was revealed. She closed the ledger, her fingers brushing its cracked spine, and leaned back, the chair creaking under her weight like an old friend settling in. The house felt different now, less a cage, more a witness, its creaking beams and peeling paint holding Nana's story as much as hers. Tomorrow, Margaret would arrive, bringing a piece of the past Eleanor hadn't known she'd lost. Tonight, though, it was just her and the tea, the rain, and the weight of what she'd done. She'd stood up, not with shouts or fists, but with facts, and the family she'd known had cracked open, revealing something raw and real beneath the surface. The steam dissipated, leaving her cup half full, and she stared into it, her reflection faint in the amber liquid, distorted by the ripples. She'd won, yes, Margaret's share secured, the debts exposed, but it wasn't triumph she felt, not entirely. It was something quieter, heavier, a reckoning with what family meant, what it cost to see it clearly, and what it took to hold it together when it broke. The rain tapped on, a steady rhythm, and Eleanor sat there, alone but not lonely, the ledger at her side like a promise kept. Sunlight broke through the morning haze, spilling into the kitchen as Eleanor rinsed her teacup, the clink echoing in the stillness. The rain had stopped, leaving the air sharp and the yard dewy. A soft knock pulled her to the front door. She opened it, hands still damp on Nana's daisy towel, and saw Margaret Ellis, short, brown-gray hair in a bun, green coat modest. Her hazel eyes, Nana's eyes, met Eleanor's, sparking recognition. Eleanor. Margaret's voice was quiet, a faint drawl lingering. Yes, Eleanor said, stepping aside. Come in. They settled in the living room, Margaret on the floral couch, Eleanor in the armchair. Eleanor set the ledger on the coffee table. This is yours too, she said. Not just money, our story. Margaret touched it, hesitant, then opened it to Nana's scribbled note. I kept Margaret a secret to protect her. Her voice shook. She thought about me? Always, Eleanor said. She wrote you in, wanted you to have this. Margaret closed it, eyes glistening, and nodded. Why call me? She asked. You could have let it go. Nana chose me to fix this, Eleanor said, voice steady. For her, for you. They had to face it. Margaret's faint smile warmed. You're like her, quiet, strong. Maybe, Eleanor said, a small laugh breaking free. She fought with facts. I did too. They sat briefly, sharing Nana's shadow, until Margaret left, ledger in hand, promising to return. Eleanor lingered in the doorway, sun warming the earth, the house silent. Family was messier than she'd thought, worth fighting for with truth. Eleanor's discovery shattered her family's fragile lies, exposing Diane and Ray's greed and their underestimation of Nana's sharpness and Eleanor's resolve. In a world of smiles masking silences, one voice, wielding truth, undid it all. She didn't just stand for herself or Margaret, she championed every quiet soul overlooked by the loud. Family, she learned, isn't just blood, it's the honesty that binds or breaks it, a messy, vital thing worth defending. Eleanor Grayson was the one they ignored, until she turned the tables with a ledger and a will. You don't need to be loud to be powerful. If you've ever been dismissed or underestimated, this is your moment. Dig into the details, wield your knowledge, and claim what's yours, whether it's justice, recognition, or a truth long buried. The world underestimates the quiet at its peril. Take action now. Uncover your strength, challenge the status quo, and rewrite your story. What will you prove them wrong about?